Hi everyone! In this video, we'll go over a few updates and new information in the Idaho versus Brian Kohberger case. I'm essentially making a summary of the most important things that were mentioned in the closed hearing that took place in late January, and the document will also be included in the description box with all the sources as always. In this hearing, several witnesses testified, among them Brett Payne, whom we know very well at this point, including some expert witnesses who talked mostly about the IgG information, DNA, genetic genealogy, all that stuff. Leave a like if you are enjoying these summaries and these types of videos, and let's get right into it. The first person to testify was Officer Brett Payne. He wrote the PCA, he was the lead detective. Well, actually, Payne lets us know that he didn't, in fact, become the lead detective in this case until 24 hours after law enforcement became aware of this case. So I did a little bit of digging through the past, and it seems that someone called Tyson Barrett was first the lead detective in the Idaho 4 case. So if you look back at old articles, when the news first broke out on November 13th, it was Tyson Barrett, more specifically Captain Tyson Barrett, who was being called the case agent. Again, all the sources will be in the description box where I found this. So I do wonder why they gave this case to Payne 24 hours later, because it seems that Barrett, he's now retired, but he had been with the law enforcement for longer than Payne. He was apparently more experienced, but maybe also more preoccupied with other stuff, so they just assigned the case to Payne. I don't know, this is all speculation. I have no idea how this works, so I'm just being curious. Let me know if you have any thoughts or opinions on that, if you think it's relevant at all. But anyway, we're moving on now to what Payne had to say in his testimony about Brian Kohberger. Payne confirms that the law enforcement didn't have Brian Kohberger's name until December 19th, 2022. He was not on their radar before that date. And on that day, on December 19th, law enforcement only received Brian Kohberger's name, nothing else, and even the name was given as a tip. They keep talking about it. It was only provided to them and was supposed to be taken as a tip, nothing else. And Payne then explains that once they had his name, they started doing independent research on this suspect. Sometime after, they also received some documents related to the IgG information. He doesn't know how many documents, but he estimates thousands of pages, and he doesn't know where these documents are now. And that is a very good question, because they seem to have vanished into thin air. Let's see if they re-emerge by the time this trial takes place. So there is no further clarification on that, but we do have some more information about male B and male D, which were two other DNA samples found at and around 1122 King Road residence. So this info didn't technically come from Payne's testimony, it came from another witness, but I'm including it here because it pertains to these DNA samples found at the house. We now know that BK's DNA sample on the knife sheath was originally unknown male A. So male A is Brian Kohberger. Then we also have unknown male B and unknown male D. We still don't know who unknown or potentially known male C is. Now, male D is blood on some gloves. The document specifically states some gloves around the house, found around the house, and it was, I think, originally believed that it was one glove, but apparently there are several. Well, I guess a pair of gloves would be safe to assume. And male B was also briefly mentioned before, but now we know a couple more details. So male B was found on the handrail inside the house, and now we know which handrail. So it was the handrail leading from the first to the second floor, not up to the third floor. They did not test male B, and the reason for that, as Payne explains it, is because they already had Brian Kohberger's profile in the CODIS database. CODIS is the national DNA database. So entering a new profile would remove the existing profile, so if they entered another one, that would remove Brian Kohberger's profile, allegedly. But then Payne also contradicts himself a little bit, because he says that, oh, they were aware of male B before they had Brian Kohberger's information. So the question is, why didn't they test male B before? right? But he did say that they could always test male B at a later point, so that's why they didn't find it necessary to do it at the time. And Taylor also confirms with Brett Payne that the video of what was identified as the suspect vehicle, the video from the 1112 King Road camera, showed a car, but you couldn't see enough of it to determine whether the front license plate was displayed or not. And remember, that was a big thing in the PCA, or not a big thing, but it was a thing. It was mentioned there as if it were relevant. And of course, what Ann Taylor is trying to do here, she's kind of alluding to the fact that the whole thing was reverse engineered. So she's implying that only after Payne learned about Kohberger, he put this piece of information into the PCA as if it's something relevant. Right, so the second witness is Rylene Nowlin. She works for the Meridian Lab, which is the Idaho State Police's forensics lab in Meridian. She hasn't been directly involved in this case in any kind of research, so I'm assuming that her reason for being here is because she's an expert in this field. She talks a little bit about how Othram Labs was contracted for this job and what was expected that they would provide after the work was done, right? She talks about what is standard practices, what is customary. So she says that what Meridian Lab received was only the preliminary report, no extra data, no notes, nothing else. She talks about a couple of other things, but I'm going to mention those with other witnesses just so that the topics are distributed a little bit better. One of the things that Nowlin also talks about is the trash pool. She provided some information on which items from the trash would be good for DNA extraction. In the trash, apart from the DNA that we already know about that was later linked to Kohberger, was apparently also a mix of DNA, of female and male DNA. So the major component was a male and the minor component was a female DNA. They didn't perform a comparison if this male DNA, so if the male DNA in that mix also matches to Brian, but that was another sample that they collected. The third witness was Matthew Gamette, I don't know how to pronounce it, but he is the Idaho State's Forensics Lab System Director. He basically oversees different processes. He reaffirms what Nowlin mentioned. So Othram was contracted to do the STR profile. They gave the police the preliminary report, but without any analytical notes or data, just the end result, no steps in between. And then they were directed to transfer everything to FBI. This was not the final report. The testing wasn't done yet. This is where Othram stopped and gave everything over to the FBI. So Othram, once they finished however much of their testing they finished, they gave those recommendations for who could be a person of interest to law enforcement. And they actually got to several individuals that could be of interest to this investigation. Othram found 4 brothers, but they all had low statistical matches to the DNA profile found on the knife sheath. And these brothers did not have the last name Kohberger, but after they received this information about these 4 brothers, the Idaho State Police basically did their own searching. They looked for publicly available information about these 4 brothers. One of the brothers did an ancestry test of sorts. He submitted his DNA information into one of those DNA databases, and they actually did reach out to him, but he did not want to participate in anything. They contacted him via a phone call, and it was a 3-way phone call between a detective from Moscow PD, between Matthew Gamette and this individual, this brother. It's unclear if this phone call has been recorded or documented, or if there are any written notes about this phone call. Now, one of the issues that Ann Taylor finds is that Othram's profile is much smaller than the FBI's profile. So Othram did their work and generated information, and then the FBI did their work and generated a much larger file, much larger data set. Basically, FBI got many more SMPs than Othram, and there is no explanation or documentation for how that happened. So what she's implying is that apparently, allegedly, FBI searched more databases, so additional databases that Othram did not, and these would be some of the genealogical databases that do not allow law enforcement searches. So she's just trying to imply that the FBI broke their own policy, which we will later get back to that point. The next person to testify is called Daniel Hellwig. He is a forensics director at Intermountain Forensics, which is a nonprofit organization. What he talks about is different processes for how you get to an SMP profile versus an STR profile. Essentially, in both cases, you have to pop open the DNA, wash off the residual material that you don't need, and from that point onward, it's a different process for how to get to an STR profile versus an SMP profile. There's a lot of technicalities there that I'm not going to mention because I don't even fully understand them, and I don't know how relevant they are for us lay people, but I guess a relevant piece of information is that an SMP profile gives you more information about an individual than an STR profile. Because these are such long and complicated processes, Hellwig reaffirms that yes, it is standard practice to document everything, chain of custody, repeatability, and reliability of evidence, so that you can validate the results. And this is what's missing in the Idaho 4 case, or at least what the defense is missing, is this whole documentation for how exactly these things were performed, right? Lastly, we hear from Leah Larkin, who is a genetic genealogist, and she's also been involved in this case pretty much from the start. She confirms that Othram generated an SMP profile, then uploaded it to GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, so the two databases that do allow law enforcement searches, and then they were contracted to do the genetic genealogy, but were told to stop on December 10th, 2022, and from that point, the FBI took over. Othram's preliminary report offered 2 DNA matches. They found that they were allegedly third cousins to each other, and Othram concluded that the person whose DNA was found in the 1122 King Road house on the knife sheath was likely descended from the second great-grandparent of these 2 matches. So the crime scene profile was most likely descended from X and Y, but Larkin points out that it could also have been descended from one of X and Y's siblings. Now, based on my understanding, and do take this with a grain of salt, I might be way off here, but this is kind of how I'm understanding this. I could be completely wrong here, so this is all just allegedly my interpretation of what I read here. I'll just leave this here, and do let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with how I interpreted this. Now, on the topic of FBI searching different databases, Larkin does also believe they searched a couple more databases, because the FBI actually provided a list of the databases that they searched, and among them are also 2 databases that do not allow law enforcement searches. So that kind of implies that they broke their own internim policy. And additionally, because there were a couple more matches in the FBI report than in Othram, Larkin believes that if Othram came across these matches, some of them were pretty good matches. The fact that they didn't include them indicates that these matches likely came from different databases, the ones that only FBI searched but not Othram. So yeah, this is most of the relevant information from the closed hearing summarized. Do let me know if I left out any important details that you would like to mention. Let me know what you think about the Idaho 4 case, and I will see you soon in another update, I suppose, or maybe some other non-related video. You never know on this channel. Either way, thank you for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye, guys.